Well, it's an honor to be here, and Bill, thank you for your leadership and work. I know it comes from a personal place with your own family, and you've done so much to raise awareness with the Cancer Day and advocacy, so thank you. Let's give Bill a round of applause for his leadership. Thank you to all of you for coming to the Capitol. It's good to have more scientists and experts on the Hill. We can use more of that more often. If you saw the State of the Union last night, there was one moment that captured the hearts of everyone in that building. There were maybe a couple, but one that stood out when President Trump recognized the 10-year-old girl who fought brain cancer, and the first person on her feet applauding was Nancy Pelosi. The work you're doing is something that touches the lives of everyone in this building, and it can remind us of a common American purpose of things that we can actually get done to move this country forward. The work I'm focused on specifically relates to clean water. Now, you all know the science much better than I do, but decades of underinvestment in our infrastructure and water have left millions of Americans exposed. The Census Bureau estimates that there are 1.6 million Americans without access to complete plumbing in their homes. That's shocking to me. I remember I was born here, but as a kid I would go to India to meet my grandparents, and I would think that those were issues that developing countries face. I would never think that there were over 1 million homes here where people don't have adequate plumbing in the richest country in the world. And of course, highly fluorinated chemicals, commonly referred to as PFAs, are growing in this contamination crisis. And our EPA currently doesn't regulate them. I had to double check with my staff when they put that research, and I said, you mean they don't regulate them at all? Are you sure? I don't want to say something that's factually inaccurate. And that's the truth. There is no regulation of these PFAs. I know Mindy has done a tremendous amount of work in educating people on Congress and Mackenzie, and who's interning with us, and Kevin Fox, who's my senior policy aide. They have looked at this, and right now we have absolutely no regulation, and we know that these contamination sites are possibly causing or leading to cancer and other diseases. There are 3 contamination sites in the Bay Area, near where I live, and many constituents have spoken to me about this issue. So it's not just an issue that a few people are talking about. Now, I don't want to be too partisan, but a former Koch Industries official has been put in charge of the administration to run chemical research. This reminds me of the time where they put the person in charge, I kid you not, they put someone in charge of the EPA on air pollution who had written a paper saying that the air is too clean. I said, one of my friends said, how do they find these people? His argument, this person wrote a whole paper on it, that so much for academic liberal bias. He wrote a paper that got published saying that kids are not getting enough exposure to pollutants and aren't building their immunity, and that our air is too clean. Look it up. That person was actually appointed to be responsible for overseeing our air. And so the person who's been put in charge of chemical research is actually worked in industry. Now, look, I have no problem against chemical manufacturing. My father was a chemical engineer at Ramen House. But you have to have standards. You have to have accountability. You have to have regulation and oversight so that the chemicals that are being developed to modernize our nation or move industry forward aren't at the expense of people's lives. The National Defense Authorization Act included funding for a study. That's the first step in Washington. You got to get something studied before you get action. So we have at least, I'm on the Armed Services Committee, and in 2018, we at least had a study on what the impact is of PFAs. And last Congress, the FAA reauthorization removed PFAS from firefighting foam, at least at commercial airports. So that was a step forward. Now, what we have to do, I think, is look to some of the localities and states that have made progress on PFAS. San Francisco has banned PFAS from single-use foodware. Washington State has banned PFAS from food packaging and fighting foam. And we're making some progress here in Congress. There's a new bipartisan PFA task force, and these efforts do need to be bipartisan. I'm glad Fred Upton was here because he genuinely did a lot of good work on areas of cancer prevention and cancer research. And the task force is being led by two outstanding members of Congress, Representative Kildee, who's from Michigan, who's at the center of the Flint Water Crisis that was in his district. I went there with him, and you see the impact that has had. By the way, even though it's out of the national news, the community is still suffering in Flint. And Brian Fitzpatrick, who actually represents the district where I was born and grew up in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, and every Democrat names Brian Fitzpatrick as their favorite Republican because he gets on all our bills. But he is someone who is thoughtful, and both of these people are good people to be leading this task force. The task force is growing. Of course, I'm a member. And it has Debbie Dingell, who's also from Michigan. I'm sure some of you have worked with Debbie before. And Debbie Dingell has a bill called the PFA Action Act that at least designates PFAS as hazardous substances. So that, again, we have to build the case for why they need regulation. So we're having a study. We're going to designate them as hazardous substances. And that would make contaminated sites ineligible for funding from the federal government. Representative Boyle, who's also from Pennsylvania, you notice a pattern, Pennsylvania and Michigan, both heavily affected by PFAS, has introduced legislation to require the EPA to set a level of PFAS for drinking water. Now, when you talk to Mindy, she's fighting in New Hampshire for the right standard. I mean, how high should the standard be, or how low should the standard be? The fight in Congress right now is just to have a standard, just to say that, at some absurd level, we shouldn't allow PFAS in drinking water. It seems common sense. In Congress, I also was a supporter of the Water Act introduced by Representative Ellison, and the bill would provide $35 billion a year to improve drinking water by dedicating a source of funding for community water and water systems. $35 billion is the amount that the EPA estimates we really need for our water infrastructure. So PFAS are just one issue of a larger infrastructure. Let me end with this note. I wanted to focus on the PFA problem because that is something that I'm passionate about, that I'm working on, and that is just one aspect of this fight to prevent cancer and on cancer research. But the work all of you are doing, I think at a time in our country where we're so divided along geography, so divided along party, we need things that will summon a common purpose, that will remind us that America is the leader when it comes to innovation, when it comes to breakthroughs. I want our nation to be known not for the wars we fight or the missiles we launch, but for our contribution to humanity, for solving disease, for solving and moving the world forward. The reality is the leading research, the most path-breaking work is still done in the United States. Much of it, a lot of it's done in my district in Silicon Valley. A lot of it is done at NIH. A lot of it is done by people like you. So thank you for what you're doing. Continue to do what you're doing, and I think it will hopefully inspire those of us in Congress to get our act together and do something worthy as well. Thank you for having me.